Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching History of Japan by Bill Wurtz. Now, a while ago we reacted to Bill Wurtz's video, History of the Entire World, I guess. Now, to my understanding, this is sort of a precursor to that one, right? Instead of focusing on the entire world, you zoom in a little bit to Japan specifically. So I'm excited to jump in to another one of his videos, but before I do, I'd appreciate it if you guys would leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and check out my Patreon, which is linked down below. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's jump right into this reaction.
Japan is an island by the sea filled with volcanoes and it's In the year -1 billion, Japan might not have been here. In the year -40,000, it was here, and you could walk to it.
We're back to that rather fast-paced Bill Wurtz style, things constantly popping up. The short musical numbers throughout, it really keeps you focused on the video.
Year -1 billion, Japan might not have been here. In the year -40,000, it was here, and you could walk to it, and some people walked to it. Then it got warmer, some icebergs melted, it became an island, and now there's lots of trees.
That's the same thing we saw with the Americas, right? People were able to walk over to the Americas, and then, oh, whoops, now you're not. You're stuck there.
Because it's warmer. So now there's people on the island. They're basically sort of hanging out in between the mountains, eating nuts off trees, and using the latest technology, like stones and bowls. Ding dong, it's the outside world, and they have technology from the future, like really good metal and crazy rice farms. Now you can make a lot of rice.
Okay, I can definitely see how this is a precursor to History of the Entire World. Right? We're getting a lot of familiar themes and music even.
really quickly. That means if you own the farm, you own a lot of food, which is something everybody needs to survive. So that makes you king.
Right, we got some of that beautiful social hierarchy.
Rice farming and rice kingdoms spread across the land, all the way to here. The most important kingdoms were here, and here.
Wow.
But this one was the most important, ruled by a heavenly superperson, or emperor for short. Knock knock, get the door, it's religion. The new prince wants everyone to try this hot new religion from Biekt. Please try this religion, he said. No, said everybody. Try it, he said. No, said everybody again, quieter this time. And so the religion was put into place, and all...
That's how it happens sometimes, right? Especially when you have religion imposed from above. Initially, there's a lot of resistance, but if you can get over that first challenge, people will be ground down over time, more people will accept it, and there you go. You've got a state religion.
All the rules that came with it. Then the government was taken over by another clique, and they made some reforms, like making the government govern more, and making the government more like China's government, which is a government that governs more. Hi, China, they said. Hi, dipshit, said China.
Hey.
Can you call us something else other than dipshit, said Japan. Like what, said China. How about Sunrise Land, said...
Oh, that's where that comes from. So, I'm sure in this video we're going to see a lot about Chinese influence, right? You're doing any kind of East Asian history, Japan, Korea, etc., you're going to be talking about China, right? China is so influential. You know, it's this grand superpower. It's existed for thousands of years in a variety of forms, but you can really see its influence throughout, and of course, beyond the region, right? In terms of governance, technology, literature, art, politics, etc., 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 right? Chinese influence is impossible to ignore. It's an integral part of the story of a lot of the countries in this region.
Japan. And they stole China's alphabet and wrote
Right,
a book about
exactly.
themselves. And then they made lots of poetry and art and another book about themselves.
Oh, that's
then
nice.
They stopped moving the capital every time the emperor died and kept it in one place for a while.
Hey, Kyoto, still an important city in Japan today, one of Japan's most recognizable cities.
Right here. And they conquered the north, finally. Get that squared away. A rich hipster named Kukai is bored with modern Buddhism, visits China, and learns a better version, which is more spiritual.
Right.
Comes back, reinvents the alphabet, and causes art and literature to be great for a long...
I mean, I was just talking about that Chinese influence. Go to China, pick up Zen Buddhism, bring it back, cause a whole artistic renaissance, right? So, once again, that Chinese influence, impossible to ignore.
Long time. And the royal palace turned into such a dream world of art that they really didn't give a shit about running the country.
Oh.
So if you live outside the palace, how are you supposed to protect your shit from criminals? Hire a samurai. Everyone started hiring samurai. Rich, important people hired samurai. Poor people who could not afford to hire samurai did not hire samurai.
Right.
The samurai became organized and powerful, more powerful than the government. So they made their own military government. Here, they let the emperor still be emperor, but the shogun is actually in control. Breaking news, the Mongols have invaded China.
Right, there's this popular notion of the samurai. We have this very cinematic, dramatic version, but the samurai were this important class that, especially as they became more powerful and the emperor became less powerful, did a lot of the governing and running of the country, ruling over different domains, governing, that sort of thing. So these were a powerful class, somewhat equivalent. You might talk about sort of feudal lords and knights in other countries. It's not, of course, a direct comparison. Different things happen in different places, but just to sort of give you an idea.
But the shogun is actually in control. Breaking news, the Mongols have invaded China.
We've invaded China,
said the Mongols.
Please respect us, or else we might invade you as well.
Uh-oh.
Okay, said Japan. So the Mongols came over, ready for war, and died in a tornado. But they tried again, and had a nice time fighting with the Japanese, but then died in a tornado.
Damn.
Then the emperor overthrows the shogunate. Then the shogunate overthrows him back and moves to Kyoto and makes a new shogunate. And the emperor can still dress like an emperor if he wants, that's fine. Now there's more art.
Right, the emperor's more of a puppet at this point in time. Yes, you can stay emperor. There is sort of religious, political significance to that, but you're not the one really calling the shots.
Painting with less colors, collaborative poetry, plays, monkey fun, tea parties, gardening, architecture, flowers. It's time for who's going to be the next shogun. Usually it's the shogun's kid, but the shogun doesn't have a kid, so he tries to get his brother to quit being a monk and be the next shogun. He says okay, but then the shogun has a kid. So now who's it going to be? Vote now on your phones. And everyone voted so hard that the palace caught on fire and burned down.
Yeah, that's what we call a real succession crisis. It's never good when you've promised a position to somebody, or for whatever reason they believe they're going to get it, and then you say, ooh, actually it's gonna go to my kid here. That's gonna cause problems.
The shogun actually didn't care. He was off somewhere doing poetry, and the whole country broke into pieces. Everyone is fighting with each other for local power, and it's anybody's game. Knock knock, it's Europe. No, they're not here to take over. They just want to sell some shit, like clocks, and guns, and Jesus. So that's cool, but everyone's still...
Right, we see some interaction with Europe here. Merchant ships arrive, I believe especially Dutch ships. And of course they bring, some European ideas, religion, goods, that sort of thing. Right, there's trade going back and forth. It goes both ways. But Europe still does not have a lot of access to Japan. It's sort of a similar deal with China at this point, where Europe can come over, but they're not powerful enough yet that they can push these countries around, right? They have certain ports they can land in, certain places they can go. Europeans, if they're allowed in, they can do certain things, but there's still a lot of restrictions on them.
Fighting each other for control, now with guns. And wouldn't it be nice to control the capital, which right now is puppets, with no one controlling them? This clan is ready to make a run for it, but first they have to trample this smaller clan, which is in the way.
Right, surely that'll go down very easily.
Surprise, the smaller clan wins, and the leader of that clan steals the idea of invading the capital and invades the capital. And it goes very well. He's about halfway through conquering Japan.
And we have done some videos on this, by the way. Japanese history, not my area of expertise, and by that I mean I know very little about it, next to nothing, frankly. But we know a bit about this because we've done some videos on it.
When someone who works for him kills him, and then someone else who works for him kills them, and that guy finishes conquering Japan.
I mean, Oda Nobunaga, Hideyoshi, we've got some extremely important names to the history of Japan. Probably some of the best known names associated with Japanese history. So well known that even I can recognize them.
And then he confiscated everybody's swords, and made some rules. And now I'm going to invade Korea, and then hopefully China, he said, and failed, and also died. But before he died, he...
Surely Japan will never try something like that again. Foreshadowing.
Told these 5 guys to take care of his 5-year-old son until he's old enough to be the next ruler of Japan. And the 5 guys said, yeah, right, it's not going to be this kid, it's going to be one of us, because we're grown-ups. And it's probably going to be this guy, who happens to be way more rich and powerful than the others. A lot of people support him, but a lot of people support not supporting him. They have a fight, and he wins, and starts a new government, right here. And he still lets the emperor dress like an emperor, and have very nice things. But don't get confused, this is the new government, and they are very strict.
Yeah.
So strict they close the country. No one can leave, and no one can come in.
Yeah, and I talked about how, certain Europeans are allowed. Some of that still continues, but now this is a very isolated Japan.
Except for the Dutch, if they want to buy and sell shit.
Hey, there you go, the Dutch, they're still getting in. But like I said, it is relatively restricted, right? There is a bit of trading you can do in, I don't know if it's certain locations or one certain location. so very restricted access. But the country is primarily quite isolated.
They have to do it right here. Now that the entire country was not at war with itself, the population increased a lot. Business increased,
Wow.
schools were built, roads were built, everyone learned to read, books were published, there was poetry, plays, sexy times, puppet shows, and Dutch studies. People started to study European science from books they bought from the Dutch. We're talking geography, skeletons, physics, chemistry, astronomy, and maybe even electricity.
So, like I said, even without a whole lot of European access or influence, there are still, ideas, objects, goods going back and forth.
Over time, the economic and cultural prosperity began to gradually slow down.
Uh-oh.
Knock, knock. It's the United States.
Uh-oh.
With huge boats, with guns.
Gunboats.
Open the country. Stop having it be closed, said the United States. There was really nothing they could do, so they signed a contract that lets the United States, Britain, and Russia visit Japan anytime they want.
Yeah, so this is when America, in this case represented by Commodore Matthew Perry here, decides to arrive and open Japan up, right? So America at this point is sort of on its manifest destiny kick, right? They're manifesting themselves westwards, and along with that, they start to do some more exploration of the Pacific. And they want to establish some trade networks, right? And Japan could be an important trade partner. Now, for a while now, America's been wanting to get in there. Other European countries, right? We're in the mid-1800s, so Europe's been sailing around the world for a while now. Yeah, they want to have access to this country that's so closed off. Only the Dutch are getting in there a little bit. And so America, they decide to really assert themselves, go in there and open Japan up, not only for America, but for everybody. This is sort of one of those moments when America makes a splash on the world stage, sort of relatively early in its history. And from this point onwards, Japan is sort of opened up to trade from these other European powers and gives, these European powers and the United States, sort of including them in the bunch, gives them access. Now, of course, this is not voluntary, right? This is coerced. As we said, Perry shows up with gunboats. The Japanese don't have much of a choice. They sort of have to do this, but this is going to usher in the next sort of era of Japanese history.
Choshu and Satsuma hated this. That sucks, they said. This sucks. And with almost very little outside help, they overthrew the Shogunate and somehow made the emperor again.
Right.
And moved him to Edo, which they renamed Eastern Capital. They made a new
Edo now becomes Tokyo. We have Meiji. Now we get into the Meiji Restoration.
government, which was a lot more Western. They made a new constitution that was pretty Western, and a military that was pretty Western. And do you know what else is Western? That's right, it's conquering stuff.
Right, so we call this the Meiji Restoration, this era when, sort of funnily enough, the emperor gets brought back into the picture. Now, you hear that abstract, you might think, well, that's not a super forward-facing thing, but in this case it is. The emperor brings in all these reforms, right? They create this new Western-style government, Western-style military. They reform, they modernize, right? Japan has just had its, ports, its country forced open by these Western powers. It's not pleased with that. And so it decides, in order to, overcome that, it's going to have to emulate these Western powers, right? We're primarily talking Europe and the United States. It's going to have to emulate them. It'll have to become powerful like them, modernize, and in that process, maybe do a bit of conquering itself, right?
So what can we conquer? Korea. They conquer Korea, taking it from its previous owner, China, and then go a little bit further. And Russia rushes in out of nowhere and says,
Stop, no, you can't take that. We were going to build a railroad through here to try to get some warm water.
And Russia builds their railroad, supervised by a shit ton of soldiers. And then when the railroad was done, they downgraded to a fuck ton.
Yeah, so this is, you get to the point, we're going through a lot of this quickly, right? But Japan becomes a very modernized, powerful country, right? It begins to expand, but then they run into these roadblocks where they try to do the exact same things that European powers do, as in conquer and pillage. Of course, this is all morally wrong, but that's what all these European countries are doing. Japan tries it, and they say, whoa, you can't do that. Sorry, bud, you're not part of the club. And Japan's like, what? How is this fair? Right? And so Russia's like, sorry, stop conquering. We're going to build a railroad. And then when they're done, like he said, they increase the number of soldiers. It's pretty clear this isn't just a railroad, right? Russia wants to take and control this territory. that frustrates Japan. They feel like they're being unfairly blocked from entering the sort of imperialism club, right? The European powers and the United States. Though we are, if we're talking about this era of sort of imperialism, we are talking a lot about, countries like Russia and Britain, especially in relation to Japan. Japan feels like, well, we're being treated unfairly, and we need to assert ourselves, right? Prove that we are the equals of these other world powers.
Did I say downgrade? I meant upgrade. And Japan says, can you maybe chill? And Russia says, how about maybe you chill? Japan is kind of scared of Russia. You'll never guess who's also kind of scared of Russia. Great Britain. So Japan and Great Britain make an alliance together so they can be a little less scared of Russia.
Yeah, you have these two empires, right? Based around these islands that, Britain has conquered the world at this point. It controls a massive amount of territory. Japan is sort of on the same trajectory. This little island that's made itself powerful and is now building an empire. So they actually have some stuff in common, right? They form this alliance. Britain, because, Britain, it's in its sort of era where, as always, it feels it is the best of the best. It has this empire. It doesn't really feel it needs to associate with the other European powers. However, these other European powers are starting to cause a problem. Britain would like to have an ally, right? An ally to back it up if it gets into any trouble. And so, they go for sort of an underground pick, the growing empire of Japan. Japan, right, we've talked about their issues. They're trying to break into this imperialism game. They keep getting blocked by the Western powers. And so they say, hey, why don't we ally with Britain? Right? That's a good ally to have in this whole process. Especially, if we're going to go up against Russia, we both have sort of similar interests.
Feeling confident, Japan goes to war against Russia, just for a moment, and then they both get tired and stop. It's time for world.
Right, this is the Russo-Japanese War in 1905. This also leads to the first Russian Revolution. Of course, the bigger one will come later, during World War I. But this is a moment when, as this war is breaking out, Russia's pretty confident it's going to crush Japan, right? They feel superior. Part of that is racism, of course, right? These Western powers feel they're superior to this Asian power. The rest of the world is kind of like, Japan probably doesn't have a shot. Japan surprises everybody by dunking on Russia. Honestly, that's what happens. They win some battles, they push Russia back. The war ends sort of in a negotiated settlement, mediated by Teddy Roosevelt of the United States. So, Japan doesn't absolutely take everything, but they essentially perform much better than Russia in this war, right? So it sort of shakes a lot of things up. The world is now looking at Japan. These Western powers are looking at Japan a little differently, and it totally screws Russia over. Like I said, it sends them into a revolution. The Tsar is able to just recover. They won't be so lucky next time. So Japan really shakes things up here. And now, we head into World War I.
The world is about to have a war because it's the 1900s and weapons are getting crazy, and all these empires are excited to try them out on each other. Meanwhile, Japan has been enjoying conquering stuff and wants more.
Yep.
The next thing on their list is this part of China and lots of tiny islands. All that stuff belongs to Germany, which just had war declared on it by Britain because Britain was friends with Belgium, which was being trespassed by Germany in order to get to France to kick France's ass because France is friends with Russia, who was getting ready to kick Austria's ass because Austria was getting ready to kick Serbia's ass because someone from Serbia shot the leader of Austria's ass. Or actually shot him in the head. And Britain is currently friends with Japan, so you know what that means. Duh, Japan should take the islands.
World War I, eh? Quite the complicated entanglement of different alliances and countries.
Which they wanted to do anyway, so they called Britain on the telly to sort of let them know. And then they did it. And they also helped Britain a little here and there with some errands and stuff. Now the war is over, and congratulations, Japan, you technically fought in the war, which means you get to sit at the negotiating table with the big dudes, where they decided who owns what. And yes, Japan gets to keep all that shit they stole from Germany. You also get to join the post-war mega-alliance, the League of Nations.
The UN before the UN. Now, the League of Nations was essentially the brainchild of United States President Woodrow Wilson. Now, you might notice on this map, the United States is not highlighted. That's because Congress refused to join. So basically, the U.S., in the form of Wilson, is who pushes this, and then the U.S. refuses to join, which is sort of a funny outcome, I guess.
Mission statement is to try not to take over the world. The Great Depression is bad, and Japan's economy is now crappy, but the military is doing just fine, and it invades Manchuria. And the League of Nations is like, no, don't do that. If you're in the League of Nations, you're not supposed to take over the world. And Japan said, how about I do anyway? And Japan invaded more and more and more and more of China.
Yeah, and Japan leaves the League of Nations. They're like, we're not interested, right? Because once again, Japan, I mean, you can see Japan's on a roll. They're conquering territory, pillaging, oppressing, massacring, doing all the things a big empire does. And now the League of Nations is telling them, hey, you can't do that. Once again, Japan feels like these Western powers are trying to block it out. So it leaves the League of Nations, does it anyway. Right? This is also this era of increasing militarism, fascism, far-right governance. Right? You have the Spanish Civil War in Spain. The Francisco Franco, the fascists, they win that one. You have the fascist takeover in Italy with Benito Mussolini. In Germany, of course, with Adolf Hitler. Japan is on that same trend, right? They have a far-right, essentially a far-right military takeover. This militaristic authoritarian government, as like these other powers, they continue to expand and conquer. And this is, now we're barreling towards World War II.
And was planning to invade the entire East.
You've got mail.
It's from Germany, the new leader of Germany. He has a cool
And it's sort of funny, we talk about... Here, let me go back.
And Japan invaded more and more and more and more of China, and was planning to invade the entire East.
So we see this sort of Japanese idea of its own empire. The ironic thing is, as Japan is sort of on the up and up, a little before this time, they actually served as an inspiration to a lot of colonized peoples throughout the world. Sort of in the late 1800s into the early 1900s, right? A lot of people looked to Japan and said, hey, this is a country that, was coerced by these Western powers to open up. It could have been taken over, colonized, but instead it managed to modernize, right? Become this military power, build its own empire. So a lot of people actually felt quite inspired. But then Japan started to expand, taking a lot of this land, colonizing it itself, and a lot of people who previously had looked up to Japan became far less favorable as they faced the reality of imperial government. They started to think, oh, wait a minute, this isn't sort of Japan, moving above these European powers or proving it could resist. No, this is Japan falling into line and using these same brutal tactics that these other countries do. And so it became far less popular among a lot of these colonized peoples. We are primarily talking in Asia, but also beyond Asia. But especially in Asia, a lot of these people were, not fans of Japan anymore, especially if they were living under Japanese domination. A lot of people actually grew very resentful due to the oppression they faced from Imperial Japan.
You've got mail.
It's from Germany, the new leader of Germany. He has a cool mustache and he's trying to take over the world and needs friends. This also got forwarded to Italy. They all decided to be friends because they had so much in common. It's time for World War II. Germany is invading the neighbors. Then they invade the neighbors' neighbors. Then the neighbors' neighbors' neighbors, who happen to be Britain, said, holy shit. And the United States started helping Britain because they are good friends, and started not helping Japan because they're friends and our friends are not friends.
Right, so, from the beginning, America... It's clear that America's more on the side of the Allies, of Britain, right? Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR is very sympathetic. There's sort of mixed opinion among the American public. Largely people are sympathetic towards the United Kingdom, but America's not yet in the war. And if you're Germany, you definitely do not want America to get involved, right? Nazi Germany has conquered a lot of Europe. Britain continues to resist, but over time, they hope they can sort of bomb them out, maybe make some sort of deal, as long as America doesn't get involved. And, well, for now, the Soviet Union, it'd be bad if they got involved. Well, ends up both these countries are going to get involved from, frankly, mistakes that both Germany and Japan make.
Plus, they're planning on invading the entire ocean. The United States is also working on a large, very huge bomb, bigger than any other bomb, ever, just in case. But they still haven't joined the war. War looks bad on TV, and the United States is really starting to care about their image. But then Japan spits on them in Hawaii and challenges them to war. And they say yes. And then Germany, as a symbol of friendship, declares war on the United States also. So the United States goes to war in Europe, and they help the gang chase Germany back into Germany. And they also start chasing Japan back into Japan. And they haven't used the bomb yet, and are curious to see if it works, so they drop it on Japan. They actually dropped 2.
Yeah. Wow. Of course, this is a very, controversial move, right? You kill a lot of innocent people. Not to mention the United States had already been doing a lot of firebombing over Japan. And there is, to this day, a lot of debate over whether dropping the nuclear bombs was necessary. Right? The common argument you'll hear is that Japan was never going to surrender otherwise, and so that's why the U.S. had to drop the bombs. But there's contention here. Now, I'm not an expert on the topic, so frankly, I don't think I'm going to weigh in, because I really don't know what is real. I'd have to do a lot more reading to determine what the sort of educated opinion is. But you see, the argument on the other side is that America and the USSR were actually closing in on Japan, and Japan was extremely frightened of the USSR getting in, right? Invading Japan. They didn't want it to happen. And so with that pressure, they would have been willing to make some sort of surrender or negotiated surrender. But the United States did not want the USSR to get a slice of the pie. And so because of that, and because it wanted to show off the power of its weapons to the world, and especially Soviet Russia, it decided to use them, right? So you sort of got some competing arguments here. I don't exactly know where to fall. It's a very complicated topic, right? I think you need to be very well read to determine which is correct and accurate. But, this is sort of the debate you still hear today.
The United States installed a new government, inspired by the United States government, with just the right ingredients for a post-war economic miracle. And Japan starts making TVs.
And of course, one of the things about that post-war government is essentially that Japan mostly demilitarizes. Right? The United States does not want it to be a military power. Now, that is something that has been changing in recent years. Right? You've had this sort of militaristic conservative movement among Japanese government. Shinzo Abe was a big proponent of that. Of course, he's gone now. But he was a big proponent of that. And you've seen some shifts recently where Japan has begun to remilitarize slowly. Right? They're making themselves into a prominent military power once again. And of course, this is very tied up in the sort of rivalry between the United States and China that's happening right now.
VCRs, automobiles, and camcorders as fast as they can, and also better than everybody else. They get rich, and the economy goes wild.
Yeah.
And the miracle wears off. But everything's still pretty cool, I guess.
Wow. Yeah, you had that Japanese economic miracle. Then the economy stagnated, and the Japanese economy has been essentially stagnant for a while now, since that economic boom wore off. The country is sort of doing relatively well, but struggling with that stagnant economy. It's got a rapidly aging population. Japan's got a lot of issues facing it, though a lot of those issues are common to a lot of different developed countries at this point. Japan might just be a step or two ahead in the process. Anyway, that's sort of looking towards the future. Another good video from Bill Wurtz. God, they're so fast-paced. Right? I have a lot that I want to talk about, but I gotta pause like every 2 seconds to actually get a word in. But I do enjoy his style, the music, all that sort of stuff. I know he did this one, and then History of the Entire World. I'm not sure if Bill Wurtz did any other history videos. If he did, feel free to recommend them down below. I'd be curious to see. But yeah, I enjoyed this one. If you guys did, I'd appreciate if you'd leave a like, subscribe, check out my Patreon, which is linked down below. With all that out of the way, I hope you guys are having a good day today, and I'll see you all again next time. Goodbye.